6 of the winners of the J.C. Nichols Prize. They're all introduced to you at length in the program, but I'll just observe now that the 6 of them represent the diversity of the prize in many ways. I think not diversity in a gender fashion, but diversity certainly in terms of discipline, and they suggest and they remind us and underscore the impressive range of this prize. On your right, Mayor Joe Riley, who we heard earlier this morning, who in fact was the very first prize recipient in 2000. Next to him, Bart Harvey, who for many, many years ran the Enterprise Foundation and did an extraordinary amount to create affordable housing and revitalize Center Cities, who was the 2008 laureate. Gerald Hines, who received the prize in 2002, whose private development firm, Hines, has not only done large-scale urban development, but has probably done more than any other single firm to bring quality architecture into the discussion of the urban future. Richard Barron, who received the prize in 2004, who is chairman and co-founder of McCormick Barron Salazar, a real estate development firm that focuses particularly on redeveloping lighted areas in the center cities. Peter Calthorpe won the prize in 2006, one of the world's leading planners in sustainable urban design and planning on a global level. And Peter Walker, one of the most distinguished landscape architects in the world, who won in 2012 for his work in connecting landscape design to larger urban issues and challenges. So collectively, they're not only each extraordinary, they demonstrate the range and the reach of the Nichols Prize. I welcome them all. Let's start with a question that kind of jumps off a little bit from J.C. Nichols himself. He was a private developer who believed in the public realm. And the J.C. Nichols Prize honors individuals who, like Nichols himself, have had a positive impact of significance on American cities. Some of you, as we've just heard, have made your mark in the private sector, others in the public sector, still others as writers and scholars, including some winners who are not here today. How much do you think J.C. Nichols' belief in the public realm is understood and appreciated today? And how much does it matter today whether an urbanist works in the commercial side of development, in the public sector, or somewhere else altogether? And maybe what I'm really getting at is, how has the public-private balance shifted over the years? Anyone want to start out? Peter? You, please, yes.
I'm a practitioner, so I work for public agencies and also for private clients. I don't think whether it's public or private makes much difference.
Okay.
The quality of the client makes a lot of difference. And what does that mean? Well, you do have to have some money. You have to be able to pay for these things. But maybe more important, you've got to have a client that demands some sort of vision, some special thing, and is willing to pay you enough to take the time to come up with something which makes a place special. And then the other thing, the other criteria which I think is so important is that whether it's public or private, it's important that the area you're working in have some sort of institutionalization. You have to, I work with plants, my things are generally alive. you just build them and walk away. It's like having children and walking away. So I'm very vulnerable and very mindful of trying to find clients who have long-term interest in what we're doing, not just in plants, but in the social purposes of the projects, but staying with it, developing it. And today, we now have programming, which is a much larger thing, maybe only 20 years old, and that programming is crucial to many public spaces. So those are the elements that I would look for, rather than whether it was the government or whether it was private.
I think what J.C. Nichols started, and maybe obviously he didn't start, nobody started, is the endless dialogue about the public realm and exactly how it's mastered and directed. And by public realm, I mean more than just the space between buildings, more than just public property. We have a collective set of ideas that are constantly debated in the public realm around urbanism in cities. These paradigms are formative in how we think about cities. The balance has gone askew. There has been this urge, and it's a political urge, to privatize everything. And to a certain degree, the shape of the city suffers and tries to cope with it. Obviously, privatizing transportation, which we did after World War II, and turning it into private automobiles. And then, of course, privatizing public recreation space, turning it into backyards. We've been on this trend of privatizing Main Street and turning it into malls. All these things are profound shifts in what we think of as the commons. So there's a lot wrapped up in this, and every time we debate urban form, I think we really are debating this balance point, which is, should this be shared or should this be private? So, and I'm going to make this very specific with what I think is the most interesting and challenging and perplexing challenge that we're about to confront, which is autonomous vehicles. A lot of people are euphoric about this possibility, that it's going to enable people who can't drive, provide better accessibility, reduce costs, and then there are calculations that show quite literally that we can reduce the number of automobiles by 80% because they're used all the time. But, on the other hand, there are studies that now show that they will lead to a doubling of the vehicle miles traveled. We may be looking at a situation where a new lease on life is just granted to suburban sprawl because people will use longer distances in the comfort of being able to watch movies and write emails and not be troubled by parking. We may be looking at overwhelming city streets with vehicles moving about at, as I said, twice the rate, and actually displacing, a lot of calculations, pedestrian and bike trips. Once you no longer have the burden of finding a parking place, you could hop on an AV and go a couple, 3 blocks instead of walk. So technology comes into the picture and changes the things we need to cope with vis-a-vis what is shared and what is public. Now, this technology could be shared. It could be the best form of transit we've ever seen. And that would be transformational and positive. But the pivot point is it private or is it shared? And how much can we put in the public realm is the challenge. My bias is always more to the public realm. Invest in the public realm, and that is the healthy and environmentally sound future.
We'll absolutely come back to those points because they're critical to this discussion. Richard, you want to?
I think I would just add that the effort to privatize what were many public functions that were part of the makeup of cities after the Second World War has left a very real vacuum in municipal government and in the public sector of having individuals who really understand the kind of issues that Peter has described. And one of the things that has been a challenge, certainly for us, over the last 40 years or so, is just, and particularly with middle-sized cities, is that the expertise to even begin to understand the kind of issues that Peter has raised isn't there. And in terms of doing public-private partnerships, when one is working in a city, part of the challenge is just to have people on the other side with whom you can work and engage, who really understand what these issues are all about and can ultimately lead to a much better kind of placemaking in a particular municipality. And the thing that I find, particularly as we move around the country and working in some 50 cities or so, it is that the quality of individuals who understand these kinds of issues gets thinner and thinner all the time, and it's worse at state government level. And so the real challenge in terms of rebuilding cities and urban America, and even in rural communities, is that we just don't seem to be producing those individuals that have any more interest in the public sector, which is at runtime, the training ground for individuals who then moved into the private sector. But it just doesn't exist anymore today, and so we find this vacuum, and mayors are always struggling to try to find quality people that help the planning department and the building department and understand new technology. And so I would just raise those issues along the lines of some of the things that Peter has said, and just wonder out loud about how we're going to replenish the public sector in the United States if we ever do get a federal government that's interested in helping to support the kind of efforts that are being made by mayors and in some case governors.
I think the Houston, Texas, we haven't had good planning for public transportation, and that's been defeated, and I think we're suffering for that, and we will suffer in the future. And it's just lack of communication with the general public.
Let me to that too, because there's a lot of key issues there.
There are key issues there, and let me just take you back to J.C. Nichols and his neighborhood, his community building handbook, and it's very interesting. And this gets to both Peter's issues, is that his ideal community building was really a shared commons around this school and a park with the single family richer houses on one side, but in the plan are apartments and semi-detached, i.e. moderately priced housing, and presumably some really affordable housing. So I've spent my years in affordable housing, and so much of what happens today is economically driven. And so without a public realm, without the municipality and public policy, all affordable housing ends up going to the least common denominator, which is in the blighted areas, without any of the sharing of the commons or the schools, or you can go on and on as to why this happens, from economic policies to school taxes, on and on. And if we are going to have a really inclusive society that works for everybody, you have to have a champion in the public sector that are going to set the policies and the frameworks in a way that really makes sense for everybody. And without it, you can work at the edges, you can make things better, but you really aren't going to solve these issues that this wonderful panel of mayors, and boy are they great mayors, and they are looking for that public realm point between private and the public sector, but you aren't going to solve it. And let me just hold out one example of where where in Montgomery County, Maryland, which was 98% white, one of the richest counties, put in something called moderately priced dwelling unit, which was to keep the architecture, make it inclusive, to have the county able to buy down certain units in mixed income, mixed use areas that could be really affordable. If you fast forward to today, just that policy, its implementation, and the access to schools by everyone, rich and poor, today it's 50-50. It's 50% white, 50% diverse. It's Hispanic, African Americans. They all live in the same areas. The schools are the best schools in Maryland, bar none. People can live, their children can live there, the people that are in the service industries can live there, professionals can live there, and it's 1 million people in Montgomery County, and it is still richer than the county next to it, which excluded everybody through exclusionary zoning, etc. So there are examples out there of how policy and how enlightened public officials can really drive things that unite us and make us better, and at the same time, where you developers, the private sector, can make money. And the final thing I'll say on this is, initially when this plan was coming out, all of the private developers opposed it. The two largest developers opposed it. Today, they will go selling it to any county that wants to do it because it allows the county to be built out the right way with enough people to service everything that needed to be serviced, and with schools that really thrive. And so that kind of change, if we could never get other people to adopt it, but there's something in the politics today, but there are examples of things that really do work.
Well, I get back to the first point. I think the great value of J.C. Nichols, a great value of J.C. Nichols, is that what he created has been sustained. Don't argue it's sustained, but it is sustained. And that was done by a visionary private developer. So that's just out there is inspiration. It's factual that many, and obviously the Urban Land Institute pivots off of that, and wonderfully so. Then I think the issue of capacity within the governments that will largely steer or effectuate this is a very serious matter. And we, and the last thing, bad thing about mayors is that they will come and tell you everything they did. I remember reading about Kennedy, and his Secretary of Commerce was a former mayor of Cleveland, and one of Kennedy what he said is when God bless him, Secretary Calabrese had anything to say, he always talked about what they did in Cleveland, so I now understand that tendency and how boorish it can be. But, I got the most talented team of planning folks you can find, and they understand public realm, and we work our butt off on it, and everything from the chain developer who just, bring in something from another state to plop it down or whatever, and the affordable housing, which is, we built on Daniel Island, and the people said for a good Daniel Island and all of that, and you can't identify it. You got to ride around for a while, so you know where the affordable housing is, and the schools are wonderful and all, and so it can be done. I think a call to arms to support or encourage greater quality, and I think it seems to me, Bart, that and this is a bias, because I'm in from municipal government, but there are lots more resources in municipal government than there are in county government in this area. And I think that's what we done. And you know, in the weather, there is, we don't know what will happen in this next election, but if, and I'm not, this isn't a partisan speech, but if Secretary Clinton is elected, I think there's a likely vehicle to get the national government more engaged in affordable housing. And I think that it doesn't take a genius to figure out that what has changed in the last 40 years in affordable housing is that what's going on in cities is the pressure, expense of land, and so any national policy that gets into affordable housing again could reasonably have suggested standards or best practices that could help with it. Very important.
It seems that, we live in an age of veneration of the market, and the presumption that the market can solve all problems, but in fact, as we've all made clear, either through your entire careers or through comments right now, that's a fallacy, and it cannot solve our problems. Gerald Hines spoke about the void in Houston. I remember a story, this may be apocalyptic, but maybe not, of a city planner in Houston taking a young planner who came to visit him to a view of the city from a high building, and put his arm around this young student and said, "You see all that, son? My job is to let it happen." Today we know that simply letting it happen will not yield the results that we want and that we need. But not many places have succeeded in doing what Bart told us about in Montgomery County, which is a really viable, balanced plan that in the end brought more economic stability and prosperity, right? And elsewhere. Are there other examples that you know of like that? Anyone? That places where the sort of public sector, private sector balance has actually been kind of redefined, you might say, in a positive way in recent years?
Well, I think the Hope 6 program was a huge success story in, because that was even more radical than Montgomery. It basically said 1/3 market rate, 1/3 affordable, 1/3 low income, and we're going to put community services and build commons, and we're going to reconnect with the neighborhoods around it. It did everything right. Of course, when the Republicans came in, and I was happy to be part of it. Okay, right. Didn't know the whole part there. They, of course, ditched the whole thing, but a huge success story. And once again, a fabulous demonstration of the fact that these communities succeed best when they're diverse. And I do think it is very political. It's no irony that the two main political parties we have, one stands for the private sector, privatization, and the other one supposedly, not effectively, but supposedly stands for making a healthy and robust public building. Right. And perhaps not with enough gusto, we would all say, although there are many success stories. So I think it has to be, it really does start at that level. So that's one beautiful example. It breaks my heart that it's not continuing.
How long did Hope 6 actually, how long did it last, and ultimately how many units were created? Anyone know?
Yeah, it started essentially, it was enacted under President Bush as he left.
Right.
Henry Cisneros took it, and I worked very closely with the secretary and Bruce Katz, who was his chief of staff.
Yep.
And they appropriated, Congress did, about $6 billion, and I think there was something like 150,000 new units built across the United States, repurposing former public housing sites and allowing for community and supportive services to be part of the mix, as Peter has suggested. And by the time Bush got through with it and wrote, the only one who kept it going was Senator Bond from Missouri, who had been the strongest opponent of it, and we worked very closely with him. And he understood what was going on, and he was very interested in it, and had been a former governor, so he realized what he was doing. And then appropriations was stopped.
Right.
So we had about 10 years.
Right, so about a decade.
Yeah, and then when Obama was elected, Sean Donovan started the Choice Neighborhood Program, whereas the Hope Six was getting about $600 to $700 million a year in appropriations through the housing act. Choice Neighborhoods were getting $90 million. So they were getting 2 or 3 sites across the country with $30 million grants, and that's where it's been.
Which is
nothing.
Which is nothing. Absolutely nothing in the scheme of, I mean, you especially given where the housing market has gone.
Exactly.
And proportionality
Yes.
is what you really, you know, this was a wonderful experiment to show what you could do, and it involves really, in a lot of areas, tearing down public housing, putting in mixed income, mixed use services. But it's very small. So what's good is to hear mayors who come back and say, you know, our problems are how do we deal with income inequality as it affects us on the streets, etc. There's no easy way to solve income inequality. One of the cities that did the best job that I've ever seen is New York City under 5 administrations, including Bloomberg, and each one, as they changed, mayors embraced it because it was doing so much with neighborhood-based groups and others to put in affordable housing where it was needed. And all of these groups were hard at work and engaged, and it helped in the policing side of things. It helped in all the way through as to how New York has prospered. And you talk about good public servants. They are in New York some of the best and the brightest people you'll ever see from administration to administration are there and working on these kinds of issues. And what they did is funnel huge amounts of money out of Battery Park City and into the infrastructure and into trying to get some aspect of equity into the development that was the massive development that was going on throughout New York City. So it can be done. That's a unique...
Right. And actually that in a way goes back to a question that we posed this morning to the mayors, which was about lessons that 18-hour cities can in fact learn from 24-hour cities, from the first 2 cities, and there actually is one. I'm struck also by something you said earlier, reminding us about J.C. Nichols, that while we have all focused appropriately on the fact that his vision for Country Club Plaza was not ethnically diverse or racially diverse, it was economically diverse. And he did build in a degree of economic diversity, which I think by the standards of 100 years ago was thought to be already almost a radical social gesture in itself. Is that right? I think it's fair to say? Yeah. Peter?
Mayor Gerald said something I thought was pretty interesting this morning. She said, you've got to go through the cities and you've got to pick out those institutions which are either thriving or are not quite thriving, and you've got to bring them up. They become pieces that are important to the whole. Most of our work right now is with universities, medical universities, churches, all these people who have a stake in the land and have a position that they want to continue. is there some possibility where those could be given more voice? They're spending quite a lot of money. They're not, people aren't thinking of them as public, but they are public. And in fact, they are public. And I think that in some ways, my feeling is it's a false division. You have a shared responsibility for making cities better again. And I remember when we started off working in redevelopment in the 60s and 70s, the redevelopment agencies had enough seed money to essentially get in the driver's seat and stay there. Then that was taken away, and then they had to go to the developers and say, well, I don't have any money, but we do have some land, and we'd like you to do this and this and this. Now, that was a much more difficult task than they had originally. Is there a way of putting that back together again? Because I think if we just say, well, the government doesn't do this, and the government, won't do this. There are people in these cities who want it done. And they are the institutions, not just the old ones, but the new institutions as well. And they want the housing, they want people to work, they want people to have good schools. There must be a coalition in there somewhere.
And they want public leadership. I mean, Gerald Hines at this panel truly more than anybody represents the global reach of the private sector, and yet what you said a moment ago was complaining about the void of public leadership. And so, which is a void that ultimately is damaging, not helpful, even in the private sector. Is that right? Yeah.
Let me just make another point that has come up, and talking about 18-hour cities has certainly moved around the country, and many here have seen it, and it's been reported. I mean, the fascination with innovation districts, with millennials returning to the center cities, wanting more in the way of stronger public realm, and institutions in these places taking their endowment funds and other philanthropists that are invested in these efforts. They have done a lot of very, very interesting things across the United States. The big challenge is about social equity. And where these things collide is when universities and medical centers carve out areas which they can control and start to invest tens of millions of dollars in new buildings and in building space for startups, for various kinds of businesses whom they're attractive and important for tax base and for repurposing vacant land. But the challenge is really how those efforts connect with the issues of inequality. And what you don't see is that cities haven't figured out, nor have these institutions who are interested on a return on equity. They're looking to invest, to make money, to start spin-offs that hopefully are going to become the next Microsoft or Google or whatever. And the issues of inequality in these communities, which typically in these districts are surrounded by low-income areas that haven't had the kind of investment in them that is badly needed. And what you see already is that many of these millennials that move in and start in on startups, as soon as they decide they want to have a family, we can go to the suburbs, the school districts are narrow. Right? And there is no companion investment in schools in the inner cities of America. And to me, this is the most important part of this whole equation, because these young people that are coming in are not going to stay. I mean, we're working in Detroit now. My hometown, I've been there for 7 years, working in the inner city. The school system is a total disaster. It's a disaster in most every other major American city. And with all the money that's been invested, we still don't have a good handle on this whole thing. And with reentry programs, all these things are out there. And the focus on, and and the capital that is flowing into these districts is enormous. There are all kinds of venture funds that have been started, and people are out looking for more and more startups and this kind of thing. And this issue of inequality, social justice, and schools is something that just hasn't gotten the attention. And people think, well, you know, maybe they do a magnet, they get a charter school, or they find KIPP, they find another manager, they do one. But the systemic problem of thousands and thousands of children that aren't graduating and who are now back out on the streets with nothing to do, no jobs, is an enormous challenge for urban America. And that, to me, is the central issue.
And I think you're absolutely right that it is that more than the desire for a backyard that drives millennials who would otherwise be inclined today to be in the city, drives them to the suburbs.
That's right.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
let me give you an answer. I'm going to give you some positive news. We all hear this. So in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins facing that same
Sure.
issue. And you get mugged on the way to Johns Hopkins to get your health taken care of. So it's very dangerous, and they were losing key students that they wanted to come
Sure.
and study. So, and they $5 billion that's going into it. This is exactly everything that Richard is saying. But the city and the mayor at that time all got together and said, we're going to make it equitable for everybody. And there was a war between the hospital and the surrounding neighborhoods, which were very poor, African American. And amazingly, out of this came 72 square blocks that were going to be redeveloped with biotech that would be immediately next to Johns Hopkins, which is what they wanted, but with housing that would be provided for everyone and relocation. It was 50% vacant in the areas around it. And this was Hopkins Hospital, Annie Casey Foundation, eminent domain was declared, which is amazing, unanimously by the city council. These are tough race relationships, black, white, and this is underway. This is a TIF with the tax increment financing of hundreds of millions of dollars that's backed by the Annie Casey Foundation. And so this is ongoing. And the school, which Richard's talked about, was remade by Hopkins School of Education, working with other experts, and that is a model school that's coming in. But here you're using the power of what Hopkins wanted in its innovation and biotech labs to finance the tax increment that is going to provide mixed income housing and relocation benefits to anyone who was relocated out of the area and didn't want to come back in the first place. So this is a 15-year plan. It's got its ups and downs. The head of Annie Casey, who attended 72 community meetings, said if he ever has to go to another one, he's going to commit suicide. And you get all of these issues, and there is no connection between the community's understanding of the hospital and the hospital's understanding of the community.
Where was the leadership coming from?
The leadership came, interestingly, from the mayor, O'Malley, at that time, and a white mayor in a majority African-American city, and some on the city council. More importantly was the Annie Casey Foundation that just said it would put up major funds if there was a concerted plan for the entire area, and from Hopkins, Johns Hopkins University's president, who got totally on board with it, and out of his own self-interest. There's got to be self-interest.
Of course.
This is the bridging
Right.
that a public sector can go
But
on. It's not
often-
finished, it's 20 years,
Right.
20 years before it all works out.
I mean, institutions like Hopkins are often, however, perceived as part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Yeah.
So how did they bring the community around to have a different view of Hopkins as a positive presence rather than, as part of the establishment that was going to bulldoze everything in its path.
It was through Annie Casey and through those 72 community meetings and a set of demands that were put on the table and negotiated, and through relocation funds that were twice what you would normally get under any other situation, which was brought by the private sector as a small down payment on the redevelopment of the entire area that was stalemated. So it can be done. And have you ever heard of any public officials getting the unanimous eminent domain ability on a 72 square block in the downtown of an area? I mean, it's unbelievable what came out of these discussions together. And Peter Walker is onto something there, that there are these needs that the large institutions, the eds and the meds have.
Right.
And they're, enlightened, if they have an enlightened president, they can really help their institution and its stakeholders and also others. You typically need a large foundation and a council to work with you to grease the middle of it.
But part of that, it seems to me, is scale.
Yes.
A lot of the same things that you're talking about could go on quite a lot smaller scale.
Yes.
In Charleston, about this, Mr. Mayor, the various hospitals have now gotten together. The place had deteriorated, the same thing, every place. The place had deteriorated, and they decided that they wanted to have a district, not a walled district, but a district that people would go through and use, including their own people. I mean, a lot of times when we say private, we're forgetting that there are private people they have access to these things and need access to these things. And I don't know that the Charleston one isn't so large, but it is that kind of grouping together. And we were in a meeting with them, and the city was there. Everybody was there. And they were operating like a client, which is what we're looking for. We're looking for some actors. Huh?
Well, it was very exciting. The city was intimately involved and worked closely with the president of Vanderbilt University and the president of the hospital. And we have, adjacent to that, is a rather large, unusual, semi-vacant site because it was landfill years ago that the city has put together a tax increment financing district, and with the university in that instance, and the tax increment financing money will assist with public improvements and with providing affordable housing, just as you mentioned. And then in those neighborhoods, we work, you work big scale and little scale. In adjacent neighborhoods, we work with the school district in rebuilding one of the schools, created a Montessori within an existing school, that those kinds of young people taking their kids to an integrated school and not do lunch buddies there. And then there's a high school, we develop high school, so with this small scale, but working so that that those kinds of the millennials will be able to stay in those neighborhoods. Housing for them has been relatively affordable, get their kids educated. And one thing we did, we didn't, rightly or wrongly, take any Hope 6 money, not that it was just out on the table to be picked, it was very competitive. But our Hope 6 didn't give you 1-for-1, as I recall, with the public housing. And our housing authority didn't want to give up one unit. And now we have the benefit of not 10, 15-story series,
Right.
So our affordable housing projects, and we built world-class scatter site housing, got a water press and all like that. But what we decided was that we're going to invest in the existing public housing. We're going to make it nicer. We're investing in the neighborhoods and making it safe, investing in the schools there. And if you look over time, with the additional market rate housing that's going in, and hopefully with the advancement of society, that will all work. So we're working at it in a smaller scale, but it's a great opportunity.
You know, that one-to-one issue was dealt with in Hope 6 by moving to opportunity, which was the idea that if you didn't get replacement on site, there was a whole strategy of allowing low-income people to move at a regional scale. And I think we tend to focus so much on the city as both the manifestation of the problem and the ultimate solution. And there's no doubt at this point we live in metropolitan regions, and cities and suburbs, and they're indivisible in terms of their economic well-being and their environmental well-being and their range of opportunities. And I think we need to be much more systemic about thinking about these problems. So I'll put out a systemic idea.
Okay.
If part of the proposition right now in this election is infrastructure spending at a grand scale,
Oh, yeah.
and there's no doubt we need it, and clearly, maybe there's even political consensus about it. The real question then is, if that's going to happen, and it can do more to solve the blue-collar job problem than a new trade deal,
Sure.
I guarantee you.
Yeah.
I guarantee you.
People have to build this stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually jobs there as opposed to buffoonery. But, don't get me wrong, let's say we get that, which we know we need, and we have low-cost money to get it done.
Yeah,
We should attach to it that it's smart infrastructure, not dumb. You know, there's a lot of rhetoric out there, and I think in a lot of people's minds, I just more freeways so that I can drive farther to where I'm going to go. So there's a question of smart. But then there's a question of leveraging it. In the state of California, because of our carbon law, we passed SB 375 that said that we had to do the sustainable community strategies at a regional scale. What type of growth at a regional scale is going to reduce auto dependence and carbon emissions and deal with that? Now, the implementation problem is that there's no sticks, and the carrots are really small. I mean, they're just infinitesimal carrots. If there were federal money for infrastructure, serious infrastructure, but it carried the obligation that said, if you as a community want a piece of this carrot, you have to do fair share housing. You have to do proportional workforce housing so that you don't have big jobs housing imbalances. You have to do inclusionary. You have to do a whole laundry list. You could leverage that spending beyond just building the infrastructure we need and creating the jobs we need to actually becoming an incentive package that will move both suburban and urban communities in the right direction. So we have this in front of us, but it's about thinking comprehensively, and it's about thinking systemically at this. I mean, it frightens me when we get into the kind of one-off solutions, because we're just not going to get there. That we need a revolution in the way we shape regional growth, and we can drive it with the right infrastructure and the right qualifications package.
Can I suggest one other sort of rider to this grand scheme we're building here? I think things should be given much more support that allow people to walk from one place to another. In other words, what is the quotient of, that's the car thing. What's the quotient of getting out of your car and being able to do more things walking?
We have a walk score now.
Yeah, infrastructure does not only mean freeways.
Yeah, of course. That's what I
But
mean.
I mean, those would be requirements, for instance, when those large amounts of money.
Exactly.
And that would be, you'd have a requirement for housing, you'd have a requirement for social justice, but you'd also have a requirement and you'd get points. How many feet can you get on the ground?
Right. Let me ask Gerald Hines to pick up on that. Jerry, if in this utopian new federal plan that we are envisioning, if somebody said Houston has $50 billion to spend in the next 10 years, what would you spend it on? What would you do with $50 billion to the public sector in Houston?
Well, obviously, public transportation.
Right.
Is our number one
Right.
problem. And then increasing mobility in our central city. We have tunnels
Mm-hmm.
that work, like Minneapolis, that
Mhm.
has
Got the skyways, yeah, yeah.
and I think cities that those two examples are very, very prominent in mobility.
Right.
And then I think how we build low-cost housing is a big
Right.
factor in Houston, Texas, and we really haven't done it.
I know. I mean, Houston probably more than any city has historically trusted in the market to take care of it, and it is what it is, right? But it is what it is, right?
Very good.
Right. Exactly. But how? Somebody once said to me, "How do you have mass transit when you have no mass?" When the starting point is such extreme sprawl, how do you begin to develop a viable mass transit system, even if in our fantasy world in this room we had enough money? Is it actually doable, even if it were paid for? I know. That's why I'm asking, because I don't know the answer either.
Is to create potentially high density
Mhm.
by subsidizing the land cost in a particular area.
Okay.
And bringing in developers then
Mhm.
that would make a profit on that particular densification.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the public sector really has to come in.
You know, LA is now transitioning from the city of cars to the city of transit.
Right.
In 2008, they voted $40 billion for transit, $1 for highways, and their latest RTP, Regional Transportation Plan, calls for 0 new highways and all investment in repair, maintenance, and transit.
Right.
Their solution is to take all the ugly commercial strips and put BRT lanes into them and rezone them for higher density development, killing multiple birds with one stone. Not that we like to kill birds, but it's an old saying.
Right.
But that is that's a co-evolutionary strategy, which is you build mass on the backbone of very
Right.
affordable transit.
Mhm. Right.
But it leads me to one other topic that I'm just going to grandstand here for another minute.
Peter, not you.
40% of our urban environment is public right-of-ways, and yet we give it almost 100% over to private owners. There are sidewalks, yes, but in many cases they're de minimis. Bike lanes are making their way in, but storing parked cars and providing too many lanes. I think it's time that we started to recapture that space. And we've seen the beginnings of this in Manhattan and other places, but I think we can be much more radical. I don't see any reason why every 6th street shouldn't be auto-free, should be dedicated to pedestrians, bikes, and transit. You could, and of course, the residents on the street would but if they were commercial streets. There are places around the planet where this is now a normative idea. That a street doesn't have to be dedicated to automobiles.
Well,
There is phenomenal amount of
a
space.
related idea.
Manhattan, if you did that, they
They
would come to a
started it.
stop.
No, they've started it. I mean,
Well,
the
there-
last administration took over.
They have no bike lanes. Yeah, they have taken away lanes for bike lanes. But I think the most important proposal for Manhattan was congestion pricing, which was Bloomberg wanted and was killed by the state legislature, which gets us back to this morning's point about state governments having unnatural and excessive veto power over municipal initiatives. And there's a pure case of one of the best ideas in New York that would have had the greatest impact being killed by the state legislature for purely political reasons. Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to mention one other thing that ties together. Mayor James talked about it this morning. The single largest infrastructure program that's going on in the United States today are the cities that are having to comply with these EPA consent decrees. And it's not regulated by Congress. Billions of dollars are being spent by municipalities and local water authorities for bonding infrastructure. The antiquated ideas about dealing with stormwater management, as an example, and sewer separations in older cities, are as outrageous as the highway program in terms of putting pipe in the ground everywhere, instead of taking advantage of a lot of the new ideas around landscape, public realm, and to the extent that those consent decrees can be modified by federal courts through the leadership of the EPA or an administration that understands this issue, would free up all kinds of money to begin to do the kinds of things we're talking about in terms of repurposing cities, creating better open space. And very little has been written about any of this, and it's extraordinary what's going on. I mean, local water authorities are spending billions of dollars. And what has happened is that the places where they have jurisdiction, where they have ratepayers who can afford increased water bills, they go in and they do this kind of work, and then in the poor areas of cities, where they don't perceive that they can get rate increases, they don't do anything. So you still have combined sewers in older areas of cities that aren't getting treated at all. And what's overlaying all of this is what the mayor was talking about this morning, is you have 30-year-old EPA consent decrees that are still being administered in the federal courts. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. And I'm not sure what the best way is of getting at this, but it would free up huge amounts of capital.
It's sort of as if the FCC were requiring rabbit ears on everyone's television. It's as much a part of a leftover kind of technology. In a moment, we're going to turn to some questions. So if anyone has them, please again step to the microphone. Before we do, let me pick up on something that Peter Calthorpe touched on a moment ago, because I think it has relevance for Houston as well as Los Angeles and several other cities. One of the most interesting things I've seen in the last decade or so in Los Angeles is the gradual arrival of a kind of almost conventional urbanism coming up in spite of itself in a lot of older neighborhoods. I mean, Silver Lake and Los Feliz and parts of Hollywood, all of which have a certain degree of street life and walkability, kind of in spite of everything. And we also see some of that in Montrose now, in Houston, and some other older neighborhoods where, it wasn't really planned, it just kind of happened. One theory in Los Angeles is that because of the freeway system has gotten more and more unviable over the years, people are traveling less, and individual neighborhoods are providing more and more options and services and retail and restaurants and culture, rather than assuming that people will drive 20 miles for dinner and then 10 miles in the other direction to shop. And so in that sense, it's a very good thing. But can we talk for a moment about whether this is a kind of spontaneous thing, like grass pushing up through concrete, this kind of natural urbanism, and what can be done to encourage it if it is, and is it enough to ultimately make a difference in cities? Anyone want to pick up on that? Yeah, either.
I'll comment on this as well, because I think that it's the best case in point, which is trying to solve congestion by creating more pavement is the worst thing you could possibly do. Congestion is a good thing. It's a manifestation of activity, and quite frankly, the more of it there is, the more people will seek alternate means. And you just have to make sure the alternate means are there. And what you're pointing to is the organic land use consequence of congestion, which is people can't go very far in LA, and they live in their community, and it's much better.
And they make the communities more vibrant.
Yeah, so my attitude is, let's subtract pavement from cars, and therein enhance this phenomenon. And everybody thought in San Francisco, especially in North Beach, when we took down the freeway after the earthquake, that their businesses would die. Everything was just collapse if they removed that freeway. Well, of course, none of the above. Thriving, wonderful. And the traffic engineers still can't figure out where the trips went. They're still, their models cannot replicate the phenomenon. But the reality is,
But they also raised the cost of parking, and they started requiring that high-rise buildings have fewer cars rather than more, and those immediately forced this other kind. And of course, that goes up neighborhoods. I don't know how the schools are in San Francisco, but my understanding is that they're pretty good.
In a lot of, yeah.
Well, we see this phenomenon in Baltimore. So if you take Kansas City, which has lots of areas, Baltimore was 1 million people, it's down to 600,000. So there's lots of areas, and the millennials have come into the city in large numbers, and they're taking old and light industrial, loft space, other space, and really building it out in an amazing way. I mean, we've got some really extraordinary developers who get it and get what they want, get their urbanism, and it's springing up in different parts, and it's all walkable, it's diverse, it's edgy, and then there's a big art scene and a big arts district that's self-developing out of some of the places that were left. So it's really, it's happening.
That process which produced it.
And Kansas City, I'm sure, must be the same. The one thing I wanted to say is that the amazing thing about a city the size of Kansas City or Baltimore or elsewhere is where you have one of your preeminent bankers in the room and your mayor in the room, and you can actually get together and with others that love their city or interested in it. ULI wants to develop, so there's got to be a way for that to happen, and also the public good to be put in the middle of it. And they are not exclusive of each other. They are not diametrically opposed. You can get together in a way that you really can take advantage of any new programs that Peter's going to create in the new administration or that are there. But I mean, more seriously, you really ought to think bigger about what are your employment centers, what are your economics, and then how do you magnify and make them inclusive. And that's happening in a number of cities.
Good. Much more to talk about, but let's open it up now.
I've been encouraged to ask questions.
You are. And I hope Wayne will ask the last one.
Yeah, right. First of all, I want to say I've never heard Mr. Trump make so much sense despite his.
Well, we educated. This time he prepared.
yeah.
This time he did his homework, so he's much more knowledgeable.
Right. So this affordability, mainly housing affordability, keeps coming up, and there are only so many Johns Hopkins, and there's only so much federal funding, so much hope, it's dead, etc. In my lifetime, I think there is. We've never seen enough subsidized housing. We just don't have the political will or maybe the economic wherewithal. So how did we used to do it before we had subsidized in the 20s and 30s? We built housing that the carpenters and electricians did the work to afford the fund. I think it's been a conspiracy of good intentions, a lot of regulations that are piled up on top of each other. So there's something afoot now called pink zoning that some of you may know about. Detroit has embraced it, Baton Rouge, some other cities. It's about going from red tape to pink tape. Relaxing regulations like 1 fire stair rather than 2 for 3-story buildings, 1 no elevators, less off-street parking, pre-approved plans, pre-approved architects, just generally lowering the barriers so that young entrepreneurs and developers, immigrants, whatever, can afford to do housing incrementally, 2, 3, or 4, 10 units at a time like we used to do. Without subsidies, because we're not going to have enough subsidies. We've never had enough subsidies. Anybody have any comments on this sort of pink zone approach and just
lowering, you get it.
Well, you know what?
I've batted my head on this one and trying to get some of the regulations. I mean, this is where affordable housing really goes head to head with some public officials, and you can't get new technology involved. You can't relax some of the rules, and so I'm delighted. I don't know what's going on in Houston and elsewhere with this.
You know, the White House just came out with a white paper this week saying, let's get rid of off-street parking requirements. They're just killing affordability, so on and so forth. Anyway.
Which they do, and that's actually a pretty easy one
But
get
elevators,
rid of.
the fair housing, 3 stories, you have an elevator, below.
Well, you know, it's interesting because sometimes you actually have different public priorities that are in opposition to each other. For example, ADA.
Yeah, well,
ADA is well-intentioned and has obvious social merit, yet ADA is also a huge contributor to cost and regulation. And so in the same way that every hotel does not have to make every single room ADA accessible, you wonder why these regulations need to be applied in such a blanket fashion. And that's a very fair point.
Having most of the housing happen before is, which does happen in LA and other places now, is everyone looks the other way when it comes to all the codes and everything else, because you've got too many people in the same room. And this happens in LA all the time, but we were always worried in Enterprise that you weren't quite in compliance because people desperately needed places that were affordable where they could live. And I bet you if you go back to LA and you ever enforced all the rules, you get the city would be bound. So
there's a lot of accidental things.
But you guys would know more than anybody that the construction costs are not really the thing that drives the affordability. Right? It's all the other, it's the entitlements or the financing and all, So actually, I don't think you move the needle that much, although it's wise to be smart about it. I don't think that's the really big solution. I do think that right now there's a developer in San Francisco, and you've read about these things also, the micro units.
yeah.
Micro units, but interestingly enough, with zero parking and with a shared living rooms. So they have, rather than having we were talking about, well, maybe everybody doesn't need their own yard, maybe they can share a park. These guys are literally sharing living rooms. So they have, and they have their recreation rooms. So the things that you would normally have in a house, you still get the bathroom. You can put that, but they're tiny and they're just being lapped up. But they're, for very young people and they're for very urban locations. One market niche could definitely be homeless as well as another. But, of course it was illegal. There was minimum unit size.
Right.
Maybe more important than the elevator.
Well, New York is doing that too.
But they're doing that, but they've been doing roommates forever.
Yeah.
I mean, the rents are too high,
Right.
and so 2 people move in
Right.
together, and they, connect or not connect, but they can afford a place to stay in the city that is too expensive, and that's happening in San Francisco too.
Yeah, I learned.
And in Oakland, we're
Yeah.
building in Oakland,
Uh-huh.
because we can get to downtown San Francisco in 15 minutes.
Right.
Why not?
I learned when one of my kids graduated from college and got his apartment in New York, there's an entire industry of companies that will come in and erect a wall, a temporary wall that is sufficient to meet code, but not so expensive and difficult that it's expensive to take away. And you sign in the lease that you have the right to put it in, but you will allow it to be removed if the landlord wants to. And there are these people who do nothing but put in and take down these walls, chopping up apartments. And so chopping up a 1-bedroom apartment into like a 3-bedroom apartment and stuff like that.
There's some good things and bad things in that fact.
I'm not saying I'm merely observing that it is, that's all.
Before we move on, there's one other idea that we want to put on the table, which is as of right. The state of California, it's interesting, the commentary here is the state comes down on the wrong side of the equation all the time, frustrates mayors. Actually, in the state of California, it's the reverse. The state legislature is more progressive than most cities.
Right.
So they just put across the table an idea of as of right. If you're within walking distance of transit and you're building at a certain density, then, and it's, you know, the cities have adopted a plan as of right construction like in Manhattan, and all of a sudden what is a 5-year ordeal for the most minor entitlement becomes a smooth path if you're doing infill, if you're building the right thing in the right location. Now that's an idea, it's an old idea, it's what cities used to do.
Right.
It's an idea that should be reborn.
Because in fact, if there's any, any real difference between the city of today and the city of 100 years ago, it's how much occurred naturally and as of right, and that we've lost that. Yes, sir.
So back on another topic a little earlier, I was entering a competition about how to improve cities. And so I had to pick one. I couldn't pick any city in the country. So I mapped some cities. I could go around the New York region. I'd probably make some sense. And it was interesting. All the cities I mapped tried to create this C shape. So I wonder what that C shape is coming from. Well, it was the interstate. You know, all of these cities in Maine were all on the interstate highway system. So did a little research about that. I don't know if anyone's given a serious look at decommissioning them, like they've done the waterways, with, you know, federal waterways of ruined rivers, and they're decommissioning those constructions. But it just occurred to me that we're worse off. These cities are worse off with these, you know, circulation systems.
Well, I think we have definitely gone beyond any time in which we believed that the interstate highway system was the solution to our transportation challenges. We certainly nobody believes that even. Whether we're in a position to decommission at this point or not, other than in certain key urban areas like San Francisco and some other cities where they have been physically removed, but in between cities is unlikely. But I do remember Jane Jacobs once saying that, you know, the problem is that whenever there was a question about a road, people would ask the traffic engineers because they were the experts. And the traffic engineers were really good at saying whether the road should be here, or go have 4 lanes or 6 lanes, or whether it should go to the left or to the right. But they could never ask, should the road exist at all? Because they were incapable of asking that question, and that in fact, that was the question that needed to be asked often, just should it be there at all?
Well, you know, it's a radical notion, but of course Vancouver is a city that exists with no freeways, 0. So, you know, great cities can exist without freeways. They're not surrounded. And there's another thing, which is another one of my favorite ideas, high-speed rail. This administration has been pretty strong on that, and of course,
we think that, right, and Congress has been so supportive of it.
That is the kind of infrastructure we need.
Yeah.
You know, because it goes to downtowns, it basically catalyzes local transit. Of course, it's low energy and low impact. In California, it would light up the Central Valley because all of a sudden those backward economies would be connected. Right. And it costs half the dollars it would take to move the same number of people north to south if we invested in highways and airport expansion. It costs half as much. And yet everybody waves their hands and says, it's too expensive. It's a boondoggle. It's craziness. So it's another one of those public realm debates that's essential.
Right. And we're left with what's basically a third world rail system in this country. When you travel around the world, it's astonishing. And then you come back here and you feel as if you've come to a backwards country.
Trump says that, you know.
Okay. That's right.
There's 2 of us on the stage now. It's all going to shit.
Well, let's not take things out of context. Harrison Fisher.
Yes, sir. Hello. I'm Harrison Carson Fraker from Berkeley, and I want to go back to the infrastructure issues because the mayor's talked about it. They're aware of the deferred maintenance challenges they have. If you look at the country as a whole and just look at water, both the treatment and supply of drinking water and collection and treatment of sewage, it's about a $3 trillion deferred maintenance. And the trouble is, as Dave talked this morning, we're investing in the old, antiquated, big throughput system, the throwaway system. And we now have the technology to rebuild this infrastructure at fractions of the price, neighborhood by neighborhood, where we actually recycle the water. And somehow this message has to get out. There haven't been enough pilot projects built yet. We're trying to do some of these at Berkeley. But you who have been in the development business, are you aware of this? Are you encouraging these kind of modular neighborhood scale water systems that can be integrated with energy? It can also help with transportation systems. Integrating these things at that kind of scale is the sort of revolution that we need to be promoting for the city. So I just would love to hear your comments.
It's interesting, Harrison. We're putting them in every project. It's operating at project scale. But I can't get the National Park Service interested in it. I haven't been able to get any city to go along with it. But if you go to the smaller realm, the systems are all there, getting pretty sophisticated, saves a lot of money.
And they're much more resilient.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyone else, any comments, anyone else on that, except general agreement, I would think. Okay, great. Thank you all very, well, it's real quick, because we're just about at our time.
Thank you. My name is Steve McDowell. I'm from Kansas City. I'm an architect. And I guess the question is the public realm discussion has been incredible, been very healthy. But I think our problem, at least as I've watched it over the years, is that none of our councils or the mayors ever really are able to take that on with the term limited programs, and maybe that was talked about earlier today. Are there good examples of where cities have been able to really develop public policy that spans beyond elected terms that allows cities to both build it and maintain it, but also to have the money to maintain it over the years? Thank you.
Yeah, I think as we discussed at the previous session, or maybe it was back before maybe it was backstage, but there are many cities where there is, consecutive commonality on major initiatives. And I think this isn't the old days of municipal government and lots of corruption abound, and so you get something working, and it's easy to get the next man or woman to buy in and keep it going.
I think we're seeing that in New York, certainly, with some of the very large public realm initiatives, the High Line, Brooklyn Bridge Park, Governor's Island, which are financed through public-private partnerships, in fact, and partly through housing and all that. And those, as we said this morning, have actually bridged many administrations and have allowed future administrations to take credit, which is politically sophisticated and smart.
Patrick, I'll make this real quick. And in listening to the variety of all the thoughts, I'd like each of you, as the best journalists that we're ever going to get in room one, to say the one thing that you think in the next 5 to 7 years will most influence and change our cities.
Schools and water.
Say it loud.
Schools and water.
Peter?
Well, wait a minute. You want what I think is going to happen or what
Or
I
what
want?
should.
What should? I mean,
Should.
thinking.
Should. Well, smart infrastructure program that demands cities do the right thing.
Schools and water.
Schools.
I don't think schools in and of themselves, without changing some of the environment around those schools, are going to work. So I would say inclusive policies for development patterns with appropriate subsidization where it's needed.
It's a combo deal.
It's a combo deal.
Schools and affordable housing.
Thank you.
Very good.